welcome back for another video. If this is your first time here, my name's Maddie. On this channel I show you everything I get up to in my kitchen as a mum in Australia on a budget. Today is a bit of a special video. I have compiled my whole sourdough starter journey, my first ever sourdough starter journey, and my first ever attempt at baking a loaf of sourdough bread. If you've been watching my previous videos, feel free to skip ahead to around day 5 of my sourdough starter. If not, welcome. I hope you enjoy watching this journey. That was really exciting and the outcome is worth having a look at. Thanks for being here, guys, and this is the start of my sourdough starter. The first day, which is today, I'm going to put in my 1 cup of flour and 1 cup of water. Like I said, it's Woolies Essential Flour. I'm also just going to do 1 cup of tap water to get what I've got, and it's going to like it. So 1 cup of flour, 1 cup of water. I'm giving it a good stir. Okay, there's my starter. I'm going to chuck it here. So it is day 2. It's definitely got a sour smell to it and it's bubbling. Here's my smiling jar. Not sure if you can see, but yeah, it's bubbling the inside. It's kind of like separating. When you look at it from the side before you kind of mix it, you can't see it now, but there was on the front here, liquid midway down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to discard and actually throw away 1 cup of my starter. So half of it, which is 1 cup. So 1 cup of flour and 1 cup of water. Like I said in my last clip when I did this yesterday, I'm not overcomplicating this and I'm just going to see if it works. Because I'm sure there's people like me out there who get a bit overwhelmed with the thought of sourdough starter. So I'm just trying to just do it as simply as possible and just see if all the fuss is worth it with getting organic flour and using filtered water, or if it works just fine using your plain old unbleached home brand flour, the cheapest flour you can get, and then just tap water. So let's see. I am using my rubber spatula to mix it. I hope you guys can hear me. It is Sunday night. Let's have a look. Since last night, I've definitely been able to smell it more. I can hear the air bubbles when I move it around. I just want to see if I can get a good view of it for you. So you can see here, that's what I was talking about yesterday. This layer of liquid, and the bubbles look like, if I can get the camera to show you, it looks like that. And I'm just going to mix it all back together again. And I'm going to tip out half, so I'm just eyeballing this. So 1 cup of flour. Jimmy heard me talking, so he's come to see what's going on. 1 cup of water. I'm going to put my cloth back on the top. Put the 3 rubber bands on. I'm terrified of a fly, a stray fly like the one that's in the kitchen at the moment getting in this. But I'm committed to finishing the 7 days, seeing how it turns out, baking with it, and I'll be sure to film that. And hopefully I'll have a successful sourdough starter in a few weeks' time. Fingers crossed. 24 hours later, day 4 of this sourdough starter journey, and I'll let it speak for itself. You can see how much water is on the top of the sourdough starter. There was absolutely no bubbles, no sign of it rising, just this water that kept building on the top of the sourdough starter there. It was at this point I had a feeling something might be going wrong, but I did want to give it just 24 more hours of the same discard and feed method that I've been doing. So I mixed through the water, discarded half of my sourdough starter, replaced it and fed it with 1 cup of flour and 1 cup of water. Popped the cover back on with my rubber bands and left it on the bench for another 24 hours. I come back 24 hours later and there was hardly any progress, just as much water as there was 24 hours ago and only a few small bubbles in the middle of my sourdough starter. I come to you, future Maddie here. I wanted to just pause and explain my thought process at this point in my sourdough starter journey. So like I said, there was just as much water as there was 24 hours ago. I decided something's not right. So I had a quick Google and there was some very obvious problems with my method. First of all, water and flour does not weigh the same for their cup volume. So 1 cup of flour weighs the same as half a cup of water. So my search results from having a look into why there's so much water in the sourdough starter is because the sourdough starter is being flooded and it's hungry. In other words, there's too much water and not enough flour in my sourdough starter. Now, there was some really helpful comments on a few recipes and like Reddit pages and whatnot, that instead of doing 1 cup of flour and 1 cup of water, you should be doing 1 cup of flour to half a cup of water. So here on day 5 of my sourdough starter journey, I went ahead and actually I didn't mix in that water. I discarded the water and then I discarded half of my sourdough starter and fed it with 1 cup of plain flour and this time half a cup of water, and this is what it looked like. As you can see here, after I fed it, it was a much thicker consistency, like pancake batter. A lot less runnier than what it's been in the past after I've fed it. For obvious reasons, there's less water in it. So I was feeling hopeful, covered it, popped my rubber bands on and left it for another 24 hours. And this is what it looked like. Look at those bubbles. No water on the top. It had risen and fallen down. You can see that layer there where it had come up to and fallen back down. This is exactly what I needed to see at this point. So I've discarded half of my sourdough starter, exactly the same as I did all the days prior. You can even see here it's such a thicker consistency. Replace it with my 1 cup of flour and my half a cup of water. Not 1 cup, half a cup of water. I gave it a really good stir to make sure there was no lumps in it and had all incorporated before giving the top of the jar a wipe down, covering it with a tea towel and my rubber bands and leaving it to rest. It is the next morning, 12 hours later, not 24 hours, 12 hours on day 7, and I'm so happy with this. It smells really pleasant. You can see where it's risen to, it's doubled, and then it's fallen back down overnight. Lots of bubbles. You can see the bubbles as I stir it. Now, I've had it in the same jar for a week, so I am putting it into a bowl for the next few days. So I'm putting half of my starter, just eyeballing half of my starter into the bowl, and I'll discard the rest of the starter that was in the jar from the last 7 days. I feed the remaining starter in the bowl with my 1 cup of flour, half a cup of water, give it a really good stir, pop my tea towels back on top with the rubber bands and leave it to do its thing. What I do here is just use a highlighter to mark on the bowl where my starter has started at to see it rise and fall throughout the 12 hours. I come and check on it only 2.5 hours later, and you can see here it's risen by at least 50% already. So really, really promising, nice and bubbly, and it smells really pleasant. Same day here, 12 hours later, that night, I discard and refeed my starter. Here it is the next morning, 12 hours later again. I can see here in the jar that my starter has risen and fallen. It's super active, super bubbly, exactly what we're looking for. So this time, instead of discarding this sourdough discard, I keep it, I put it in a jar that has a sealed lid on it to put in the fridge. I feed the remaining starter with my 1 cup of flour, half a cup of water, give it a really good stir, wipe down the edges of the jar the best I can before leaving it. This time round, I'm marking where my starter's at and I'm looking for it and waiting for it to double in size, at which point I'm going to have a go baking with it. I cannot believe the time is here to bake a loaf of sourdough bread. My sourdough starter is looking really promising, which is a huge surprise. You would have seen in my last video, the end of my last video, on days 4 and 5, when it was supposed to be super bubbly, it wasn't. And I was starting to feel like it probably won't turn out for me any good. But like I said, I read up on it, and instead of putting 1 cup of flour and 1 cup of water, I put 1 cup of flour to half a cup of water, and that is all my sourdough starter needed. Have a look at it now. So it is up to here, if you can't see in the video. This is where it was at 9 o'clock this morning. It is now, 2 o'clock? So 5 hours later, it has doubled, and it was looking at like this about 3-4 hours later. So this is the second time in the last 24 hours that it has doubled in size. So I know that it's ready to use. It's looking really, really healthy from all that I can tell. Let me know in the comments if that's not the case, but have a look at those bubbles. Like I said, this is the second rise I've done in the last 24 hours. So I've fed it twice, every 12 hours for the last 24 hours. It's risen both times, it's doubled both times, and I also saved the discard from the last feeding that I did, which I've got in the fridge, and I'm going to make some wraps with that. Maybe this afternoon, maybe tomorrow, to use this coming week. I did a little Google search. Like the starter, I want to keep making sourdough as simple as I can. What I did is I did a quick Google search. I had a look at the recipe that had the most reviews, and that was 5-star. It's from Alexandra Cooks. I'll link the recipe down below in the description, and I will take you through step by step what I'm going to do to make this bread. The first step is to make the dough. So I'm going to get my scale out. So I have it written out here. Let me get my big, is it clean? Yes, thankfully. Turn it on at the wall. I am so excited by this sourdough starter and how bubbly it is. Okay, I've just zeroed my scale. I'm going to put in 375 grams of water. Perfect, 374. And I'll zero it again. Now for the fun part, you can see how bubbly this is. Also, thank you to the subscriber who commented not to worry about using metal utensils, it's fine. She said she's been making sourdough, I think, for years, and she's never had a problem with metal spoons or whatnot, so I'm going to use that because it's just easier. So let's have a look. So I need 50, it says 50 to 100 grams. So I'm just going to put 100 grams in. we go. 113 grams, that will be fine, I'm sure. And just while I've got it in water, apparently if the sourdough starter floats, it's ready to go. So let's put a little bit in there. It floats, yes. So it must be gassy enough and ready to go. Let's give it a stir. I'm hoping you can see the light above us is still out. We're waiting for the real estate to replace the light, but hopefully you can see what's going on here. And please, if you are watching this and you've made sourdough before, or you currently make sourdough, if you've got any suggestions, please don't be afraid to let me know. I'm open to any suggestions. So I've stirred that. I'm going to zero it and put in my 11 grams of salt. And it calls for 500 grams of bread flour, but I'm not going to use bread flour, I'm just going to use plain flour. Give it a good stir. I'm going to leave my scales out too for my starter so I can start measuring the flour and the water. Or not, we'll see how we go. I feel like if this has been working with just putting in 1 cup of flour and half a cup of water, I'm just inclined to keep doing that. I love how simple this is. Water, sourdough starter, salt and flour. And if this can work on my Woolies brand plain flour, I'm going to be very happy about that. I'm not sure how much I need to be stirring this, so I'm just going to stir it as much as I feel is right. It's quite a wet dough. Okay. So now what it says I do is let it rest. And whenever I'm resting dough in this bowl, I like to cover it with one of my plates because it fits perfect. So I'm going to let this rest for 2 hours in total, but for every 30 minutes of the 2 hours, I'm going to do a stretch and fold. I'm going to show you how I do that. So I'm going to have to set my alarm 30-minute intervals, and then after that, I do a shape and a quick rest, a reshape, put it in the fridge and cold proof it overnight, take it out of the fridge and put it straight in my preheated Dutch oven. I'm not questioning this. I'm literally, easiest way possible for me right now while Lola's having a nap is just to find one recipe. I don't want to overanalyze it, give it a go. I thought having to put it in the fridge for 12 to 24 hours or 48 hours was a bit of a surprise. I wasn't expecting that. It works out well though, because I'll have it ready for brekkie. But I'm just gonna give it a go, and you can come along with me and see how this first batch of sourdough bread turns out. Okay, I'm just gonna keep a mental note, or where's my trusty? I've literally just been using a highlighter to be able to visualize how much it's risen. And it's great because you just wipe the highlighter off. Okay, I'm going to put that to the side. Now, here's a discard from this morning. I'm going to save the rest of this that I'm going to discard. So I'm just eyeballing how much I need to put in here. Okay, that's about half. I'm really looking forward to using this card. Okay, this is going back in my fridge. All right, so I'm going to feed it again because if this turns out, I'm going to bake 2 more loaves tomorrow to have during the week. And then I'll put my sourdough starter in the fridge, probably for a week until I bake with it again. I'm talking as though this is going to work out, but I'm hopeful. I am hopeful. So 1 cup of flour. Half a cup of water. And I'm going to give this dough a real I'm going to give this sourdough starter a really good stir. So this is either day 7 or 8 of my sourdough starter. It has a really pleasant smell. It just smells like yeast to me. That really potent sour smell has gone. It looks healthy. There's none of that, I think it's hooch that I was seeing on it before. There's none of that, so I'm really excited if you can't tell. For me, sourdough starter has just been really intimidating with what everyone has to say online, because I'm sure I've been doing some reading. I think I've got a bit of sourdough starter on my face. I've been doing some reading, and not every sourdough starter is the same. And there's so many ways you can handle your sourdough starter. So I'm assuming there's just so many ways that you can work out. This has worked out for me, and it's been such a simple process. So please don't be put off. If you are what I was like, really intimidated by the prospect of starting your sourdough starter, have a look in the description and I'll write step by step what I've done. And I believe too, sourdough discard can stay in the fridge in a jar for weeks as well. So we'll see how we go, but I will refeed this tonight just so I make sure I've got a really nice strong sourdough starter before I let it rest in the fridge for a week or 2. I let my dough rest for 30 minutes and now I'm going to complete my first set of stretch and folds. I ended up putting a little bit of flour on the dough because it just felt really wet, and a little bit of flour on my fingers. I lifted up and folded down the dough 4 times, as you can see here. I was kind of visualizing like I was folding it into a square, even though that's not going to happen. 4 sides, pulling it up, folding it down, and then letting it rest again. Now the recipe calls for letting the dough rest for 30 minutes at the start and in between each of the folds until you get to your 4th stretch and fold, and then letting the dough rest until it has increased in volume by 50%. Now, I did things a little bit differently, and I want to tell you about it because it kind of goes to show this doesn't have to be a perfect method that you do. What I did was I waited between an hour and an hour and a half between each of the folds because that's what life was like this afternoon, and I couldn't get to it within 30 minutes. So it had been resting for quite a bit before my last 4th stretch and fold. Now, you can see here, this is the 4th time I go to do the stretch and folds, how much this dough has risen. So it has already done the last proof and risen by 50%. It just happened to be before the last stretch and fold. So I did my last lot of stretch and folds. The dough was, you could feel it was getting more and more resistant to the pull, which is what you want. So after this 4th stretch and fold, I didn't stop and cover it and let it rise again, because I felt it had already risen and it was getting late. So what I did was I just floured my bench, put the dough out onto it, and I shaped it into what the recipe calls a gentle round. So I just shaped it as much as I could into a round ball and let it rest covered with a tea towel for 20 minutes. Now I got my proofing bowl ready overnight. Proofing bowl is a fancy term for a bowl that you're going to let your dough rest into, which is going to help it hold its shape as it proofs overnight. You can see here I have a cane basket and I have not prepped the basket or anything. So what I did was I put some rice flour onto a tea towel. This is to stop it from sticking to the tea towel. And I've popped my dough, I've reshaped my dough after the 20 minutes. You can see here I'm kind of pulling the dough to shape it in as much as I can. And then I am covering it in a little bit of rice flour and leaving it in my bowl overnight in the fridge covered so that it doesn't dry out. If you don't have one of these cane baskets, it's okay. If you've got a small bowl that's just going to help it hold its round shape overnight, that is all you need. It's the next morning, it's been 12 hours, my dough's been proofing in the fridge. You can see it's risen. I made sure that the Glad wrap wasn't pulled tightly down on the dough, so there was room there for it to rise. I've got one sheet of baking paper down. I'm putting another sheet on top of the dough, and here is where I'm just transferring it. So I want it to come out upside down on my baking sheet. I have my cast iron pot already in the oven preheating at 230 degrees. While it's preheating, I'm getting my dough ready and I'm scoring the top of the dough. This just lets it, gives the dough room to rise and expand when it's cooking. So I just do a little star, sun-shaped score on it, and I transfer this into my preheated Dutch oven. I put the lid on and I bake it at 230 degrees for 30 minutes. I then remove the lid of the Dutch oven and put it back in at 200 degrees. So I lower the temperature and bake it uncovered for 15 minutes so the crust can start to brown on the loaf of bread. Lola's still asleep, so I'm talking quietly, but I can't believe it. Look how much it's risen. Even if this doesn't work out, I'm still proud of me. I'm proud of us. Let's put it back in for 10 minutes uncovered.
Ready? Yeah, ta-da! Fantastic. That's great, hey? Oh my God, look at it then! I could cry.
I wanted to leave our unfiltered reactions in because it was just such a happy moment seeing this loaf of bread come out of the oven. Although I almost cried, I didn't. but I'm so happy with how this turned out. I cut into it and there are air holes, which is just a good sign that the bread is doing what it needs to do. Yes, there's room for improvement. It can be more area, that's for sure, but I'm so happy with how this has turned out, and I'm really looking forward to using that sourdough discard to make some recipes this week as well. So make sure you subscribe if you are interested in having a look at what I do in the future with my sourdough starter. Thank you all so much for being here, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.